Hi everybody, rowing fans all around the globe and watching on the Ivy League Digital Network. This is Andy Card announcing to you from the very windy and very sunny and very warm River Thames in New London, Connecticut. I'm joined today not by my usual partner, Charlie Hamlin, from the Harvard class of 1970, has gone west. He's still a young man and he's gone west to the wilds of Seattle, Washington. So today it's my great pleasure to be joined by a younger and perhaps more handsome Harvard man from the class of 75, Greg Stone. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you, Andy. It's a pleasure to be here, and I will agree with Andy. It is as windy as we can remember it here in the Thames. The NOAA says that the base speed of the wind is 22 miles an hour with gusts to 30, and I think it's every bit of that. We're seeing some whitecaps here at the 2 mile mark, where we are waiting for the start of the third varsity race. This race replaced the freshman race. It has got some very experienced oarsmen, 3 Vs in this day and age. I think, Andy, you know this from your own coaching, the lightweights are faster, I think, probably than many freshmen were.
Oh, without question. Now that freshmen are eligible and have been for a number of years, you're seeing freshman rowing almost completely extinct in terms of being a separate boat. And now you're just getting the best athletes where they belong in each program. So these two crews here, between Harvard and Yale, they're racing for the New London Cup, which is awarded annually to the winner. Used to be of the freshman race, but now it's developed into the 3V race. And if you can look at the camera, or if you're watching on the Ivy League Digital Network, you can see the wind really picking up a lot of whitecaps. It's getting near unrowable during some gusts. And Greg, since we're racing upstream this year, this is going to present a huge challenge for the oarsmen in each crew. How would you've rowed here 4 times, correct?
Yes, I'm right. Well, I've rowed here 3 times, actually, because in my junior year we rowed in Cambridge. It's another story.
Yeah, we'll talk about that before the JV race. But in practice, what is the river like on a daily basis, and what time do you practice? Because it does tend to get windy here.
Well, this is, in eights, this is just a grand place to train and row. It is not like the Charles or the Housatonic in that it's placid water with a few wakes. It's really big moving water. We've got a current here about 3 knots at its max, and the boat is always shifting underfoot. But it's a different feeling. It's a good feeling. It's sort of fun. And we would row at Harvard before breakfast, so we'd probably launch at around 6:30 before the breezes came up, and then row again quite late in the day.
Well, the tide is something that neither crew has to contend with on their home waters, both rowing on fresh water. So the tide here has also presented some challenges for the stake boat people that are trying to set the stake boats. And as we shift from the 2 miler to the 3 miler to the 4, while the crews race upstream, the boatmen in each lane have to take their anchors up and haul a mile downriver and reset. And right now, maybe the camera is showing this, the boatman for Yale, whose name is Phil, he's trying to do a great job of getting his launch set up in the middle of the lanes. Now the lanes today in the 3V race, Yale is on the east side on the New London shore, and Harvard will be on the west side nearer to Groton. And as we survey the course, the last mile is going to be a little different conditions than the first mile.
Right. So I would say in these conditions, which are a strong headwind with a bit of cross coming on the west side, any crew would be happy to be on the western lane, which in this race Harvard is in. The disadvantage of the western lane is the last half mile is quite shallow, and shallow water slows down racing shells. But they're going to have more protected water, so that looks like a good trade-off. It's just, I happen to be on the Regatta committee, and we talk a lot about, how can we make these lanes more fair. It's a very difficult task because the water depths are different, the current is different between the lanes, and they've got the wind factor.
That really makes this race unique among all the races that are rowed across the country, whether you're on Lake Carnegie with its buoyed course, or Philadelphia with the turn onto Strawberry Mansion, or even a Derby with its dogleg left. This one is truly unique. And the distance, of course, is not unreasonable. There used to be 2 mile races, and of course the head of the Charles and other head races more traditionally are 3 miles. But the varsity race, the 4 miler, that is unique.
That is unique in the United States. It was, of course, copied from the British. Oxford and Cambridge row over 4 miles, actually 4.25 miles, up the Thames River. And it's a 20-minute race, so it really changes rowing from like the mile in running to a mix of anaerobic and aerobic to being truly an aerobic contest. Much more akin to cross-country skiing or any long-distance sport.
Well, the coaches for these two crews, it's not going to be the usual distance, the usual time that they take to cover the distance. With this headwind and the tide, it's going to be maybe 20% longer than usual. Does that change the strategy for each of these crews? Do you go out just as hard and try to get a lead in the rough water and hold on, or do you just be patient, make sure you're balanced, make sure you're not shipping water? What's the strategy, do you think, that each coach is approaching the race with?
Neither one of us are privy to what these coaches are thinking, but I would think that, one, they've rigged these boats a bit lighter, so you can change the gearing that the oarsmen deal with a bit by changing the length of the oars, than like a bicycle changing gears. I would think they'd gear these boats a bit lighter, and they would talk a lot about being persistent, being stubborn in this miserable first mile,
Right.
so that later in the race, again, that second mile, they can open up.
They often talk in the marathon, you have two opponents. One is your fellow competitors that are in the race, but also the distance. The distance of 26.2 miles is just mind-boggling to race. Of course, people now race ultramarathons. So here, today, the conditions will be a severe opponent for both these crews, never mind the guys sitting across the seat from them. As you can see, both crews are having trouble getting on the stake boats.
Tried to back onto their stake boats, and both were pushed to the east, to our side, by the tide. So they both missed their stake boats by quite a bit. And I doubt that either one of these coxswains has spent time trying to back. It's hard enough to back an 8, but to back an 8 in these conditions is really quite difficult.
It's going to be quite a challenge, and my recommendation would be they both try to get on at the same time, because if Yale gets on here early and they have to wait around for Harvard, could be, they'll get knocked off course, and then Harvard will be on and so forth. So we'll see how these coxswains handle it. Let's go down the lineup, shall we, for each crew. I'll start with the Yale crew. They were 3-3 during the regular season, losing to Princeton, Cornell, and Brown while defeating Dartmouth, Penn, and Columbia. And last year in this race, the 3V lost to Harvard by 4.4 seconds in a fairly close race over the 2-mile distance. The lineup is slightly changed from what you may see in your program. It's still coxed by Mackenzie Lee. She's a senior. She's 5'1", and of course at a coxswain weight. And she's from La Cantillada, California. Hope I said that right, in the Polytechnic School. Now, as we get into the athletes in this crew, the crew for Yale averages 6'3" and 192 pounds. There are 5 Americans in the crew and 4 internationals, including the coxswain in that, of course. And let's go down the boat, shall we? The stroke is Jack McGuinn, a senior, 6 foot, 180 pounds, from Minneapolis, Minnesota. 7 seat, Jack Weber, a freshman, 6'1", 235 pounds, from Chester in the UK. He goes to the King's School, or he went to the King's School. 6 seat, Henry Bird, a senior stalwart, 6'1", 176 pounds, from Bedford Hills, New York, and he attended the Deerfield Academy. 5 seat is a freshman too, Andy Joyce, 6'4", 190, from San Francisco, California, and San Rafael High School. 4 seat, Ed Reeves, a senior, 6'8", 210 pounds, from King's College in Auckland, New Zealand. 3 seat is Angus Morrison, a freshman, 6'4", 182 pounds, from Brisbane, Australia, and the Brisbane Grammar School. 2 seat, Alex Lindsay, 6'6", 172, a long, cool drink of water, from Eton College in the UK. And the bow seat is Isaac Epstein, a freshman, 6'4", 190 pounds, from Long Beach, California, home of the Doors, and he went to Long Beach Polytechnical High School. That's your Yale 3V for today.
All right, Andy, and we've got both crews are now on their stake boats, and it's a struggle to stay on them. Both crews are using oarsmen on their port side to try to keep the boat aligned into the wind. Harvard using actually 3 oarsmen on their port side, 6, 4, and 2 to do it. Yale's got 2, being a little more effective. And I think the referee is trying to get this boat, get them aligned and off.
They might have to go to a quick start where they just get aligned and there's no long, tension-filled hesitation. They just drop the flag and go before people get appointed.
Now talking to the coaches, actually, so perhaps asking permission to do a quick start.
Our referee is Doug Stowe today. based in, used to be Worcester, Mass, right on Lake Quinsigamond.
So now we've got a number of Yale oarsmen waving their hand, which the coxswain's got her hand up, so there's something going on in the Yale boat. The referee is drawing closer to see what's going on. It's very hard to communicate out here.
Yeah, I hope you get a sense of the conditions here through the video. But if you're listening on the radio, on WNLC 98.7, you just have to, if you're in radio range of WNLC, just open your window and step outside. You'll see how breezy it is. But the wind is really picking. It's a long fetch here on the Thames, and it's really picking up a lot of chop.
And so now I see the problem. The Yale boat has drifted to the west and is now on top of one of the buoys that marks the edge of their lane. And they're still on their stake boat, so the whole stake boat's going, and the Harvard boat is probably going to do the same, and they're going to go onto an even bigger buoy. So we'll see what the decision here is. The ref's choice is either to spend quite a bit of time realigning everything or to run a floating start. And Steve Gladstone, the very experienced Yale coach, is now giving his thoughts to the aligner, reminiscent of Harry Parker, who essentially instructed people on how to do things.
Well, he was your coach, was he not?
Harry Parker.
What would he have done in this sort of situation? Oh, we have an announcement from... trying to make out what...
We've got an announcement.
They're consulting with the police.
We're now picking up an announcement, and the crews have left their stake boats, or Yale's left its stake boat. And let's see whether Harvard will do the same or whether they'll do a single float.
The committee this year decided to use sailing buoys, and they've drifted quite a bit in this wind. I even think the anchors for the buoys are being pulled around. But in previous years, of course, for ages, they used to use long flagpoles, basically, floating tall buoy markers that you could not get your oar over.
Right.
And that would have been quite a...
Sailing buoys, I think that buoy drifted because the Yale crew was on top of it, and
Possibly.
the anchor couldn't.
So it looks like it will be a floating start.
So it looks like we're going to do a floating start. The Yale coxswain has got her hand up, indicating that she is adjusting her heading for the course.
Because of the direction of the wind, this actually might be an easier way to do it.
Yes.
As long as the referee or the aligner can do a good job of making sure that the start is where they should be. Remember, all this time, we've been here now, these crews have been on the stake boat for at least 8 minutes, if not more. Any sweat that they developed in the warm-up is pretty much gone. This wind is whisking all the sweat away. It's drying it off completely.
Yeah.
So
the oarsmen are going to feel a little more discomfort than they normally would in the first 30 or 40 strokes as they re-warm their muscles.
Right. And the good coxswain should be reminding your crew, that listen, it's just going to be that way. We're going to start cold, but you know what? The other guys, it's the same thing for them too.
Same thing for both of them. And
have you gone through the Harvard lineup yet?
So while we have keep an eye on the boats here and look at the Harvard lineup. The Harvard lineup has a mix, as Yale does, of internationals and Americans. It's coxed by a freshman from Winchester, Mass. She was a walk-on. She was a sailor at Winchester High School. And that is what Harvard looks for in their coxswains. Small people who can withstand the cold and have some experience in boats. Dom Glover.
Excuse me, Greg.
Okay.
The flag.
I think we're getting ready to go because we have a white flag up from the aligner. Now we have a...
And there's the start.
The race is off. Okay, so...
Remarkably clean, actually, so far for both crews. That's a pretty good start.
Not only do we have...
Oh, you can see Harvard just hit a huge...
But we've got quite a big wake here, Andy. You can feel the boat riding. And that early wake must have been by a passing boat. So Harvard at 40 strokes a minute in this headwind. Yale looks to be and is a touch lower, 38.
38, that's what I have too. Looks like Harvard's got a slight lead here.
Harvard is higher and seems to be able to row longer. Andy, these boats have not chosen to use the same kind of shells. Harvard is rowing in the German Empire Epocher, which is known for its rough water ability and is widely chosen by crews that race in rough water in Europe. And the Yale crew is rowing at an old, reliable
Resolute, right, made in Providence. And right now it looks like the Epocher is getting the better of the Yale crew. There is a vicious cross headwind coming from port side over to starboard. Both crews are getting it equally, but right now Harvard's doing a little bit better job. This is some rough rowing in here.
Yeah, so we are now just coming on to a minute and a half into the race.
As I look upstream, there's a huge white boat laying down,
yes, and that
a
was
massive
the
wake
they dealt with at the start.
Which I hope this doesn't. The water's already rough enough for them to deal with it. But Yale is sticking with Harvard. They haven't let them get open water yet. It's almost 2 minutes into the race,
now, yes.
and by now the startup fatigue is going to hit them.
So now we're seeing these crews rowing in this big powerboat's wake in front of us. And,
that's a shame.
I know that the camera could just pan the water and can see this rolling wave, which is much more challenging to row in than the headwind itself. And Harvard seems to be doing a better job dealing with it. Maybe they've got less of it.
The massive roller here, that's just
horrible.
That's not right.
It's not.
That shouldn't have happened. But Yale's dealing with it decently.
Coming up to the half-mile mark here, and Harvard's going through.
2:27 I have. But we don't even know if they started level, but were they actually on the true distance?
Coming through about 10 seconds later, and that is not a fair margin. Yale really had the worst of that wake.
And Harvard, right? Harvard now is taking advantage of better water. The water settled down for them, and they really took off. While Yale was struggling with that wash, I'm sure the Harvard coxswain could see that and call for a little more from the crew, and they gave it. And now they've broken open water. They have about a length of open now.
Harvard's rowing at 35, which I must say is pretty impressive to me, given the weather.
Yeah, Yale about 34 and a half.
34 and a half.
34.
And the Harvard crew just is having an easier time in this tough water and a little bit longer stroke.
Well, nothing's easy in these conditions, but it's a little bit better when you're ahead. You can relax a little bit more.
That's a good point.
Push a little bit more.
Just going through some tough strokes now, a little white water up and around. So the Harvard lineup, the stroke is from Sydney, Australia. He's a sophomore. His older brother rowed at Harvard before him. And Ben Cohen is a freshman in the 7th seat, and he comes from Allentown, Pennsylvania, by way of Phillips Exeter Academy. James Clark from London and King's College is in the 6th seat, also a freshman. Max Ferguson, a junior from Miami Beach, sociology major, and he was homeschooled and self-taught in rowing. So an unusual. And then the foreman is Sean Vendrell, and he is French. He's an applied math major and a junior, and he rowed in the 2V last year as well. This year he's rowed all 3 boats, Varsity, JV, and 3V. Phil Bates in the 3 seat from Gonzaga College, which is Bethesda, Maryland. He's an economist major. And 2 seat Kurt McLeod from Surfers Paradise, which is in Australia. And he's a sophomore as well. And the Ben seat held down by Ben Strathmore, also an Australian. So we've got 5 internationals and 4 Americans, including the Cox. And Andy, now we're approaching the mile mark. Both crews are in better water, but I'd have to say it looks like Harvard is in better water than Yale as well.
Yeah, they are. The guy who has the motor launch about 500 meters upstream isn't doing anybody any favors here. This is it's too bad. These guys train all year for this, and then to have your first 700 meters ruined with a huge launch like that, a huge wake, doesn't seem right. However, Harvard that's sports. Harvard's taking advantage of it, and it's going to be hard. It'd be hard to see Yale coming back from this right now.
Yeah, it is. I totally agree with Andy that these crews really look forward to this race and the sort of mano-mano aspects of a 2-boat race, which is, in many ways more psychological than the 6-boat fleet races. And I'm sure Yale was looking forward to matching evenly with Harvard down the course.
Well, Harvard went through the mile mark in about 5:53, and Yale's going to be about almost 20 seconds behind that right now. So any oarsman that's rowed in practice, once in a while another coach comes the other way and wakes you out, or you have a wake on the Charles, you know how disturbing that can be. And you deal with it in practice and you move on. You know, you do the next piece, we'll get them again, that won't happen again. But you really don't expect these kind of things to happen in a race. I mean, the water's already rough enough, and maybe that meant that the people laying down these wakes didn't notice how much damage they were doing to the race course. But
well, I'm sure the people ahead who made that wake had no idea or no concern. I'd have to say a note for the Regatta committee is to have a little better river patrol to quiet boats.
Here's the wake again. Yale's going through it.
Yeah, a little back of the wake.
Yeah. And now the referee is steering Yale over to port, so they don't hit. So Mackenzie Lee doesn't hit the green can.
Yeah, there is a famous green can here, infamous green can. Harvard has a Coxswain's Award named for it, the Can 12 Award, because there have been 3 Harvard shells sunk on this, and which is quite remarkable in a period of 20 years. You'd think that, you know, after it happens once, the coach would be more aware of the issue, but coxswains can't really see directly ahead of them, and the can is perfectly sized, so if you're head on, you won't see it.
Well, to defend the coaches, I'm sure they've told the coxswains in practice that there's a can right there, and watch out for it. But the pressure of competition sometimes gets the better of athletes. You make mistakes.
Yeah, well, last year Harvard had a freshman coxswain in the varsity, and Charlie Butt, before they launched for the first time on this river, said, by all means stay away from can 13. And the coxswain hit can 13 that very day, and he goes, Charlie, I couldn't see numbers. I didn't know what can I was supposed to be watching for. That coxswain's now in the JV.
Yeah, I'm surprised they're still on the team. Well, we are coming into the last half mile of the race. Harvard is approaching. You know, and I thought the water would settle down a little bit when we came out the first time, and that was a report. The first 2 miles are really rough, but the last 2 miles are decent. I have to say they're not all that decent. Decent's a relative term.
I agree with decent's a relative term, but since we surveyed the course about 3 hours ago, there's a lumpiness is formed that, you know, is continued right through this course, and maybe it'll get better in the last half mile, but this has not been easy rowing. And I think that's imparting that we are now at a fairly strong incoming tide, working against this wind. I think that's what's setting up that lumpiness underneath it. And Yale just, you can see white water from the camera perhaps, sometimes going over the backs of the Yale oarsmen. That's it. Yeah, it's a really tough way to row.
In 9:10, this should be a finishing time. You know.
Yes. So a normal time for a mile in a collegiate 8 is about 5 minutes. The record for the 4-miler is in the 18-minute. That's with the current assist.
Yeah.
We're going to be looking at a time for this 2-mile race well north of 10 minutes.
You know, we are closer to the Yale shell, and we can hear them talking to one another. And I have to admit, they're still a pretty game bunch. They're still encouraging one another, and they know what the outcome is, but they're trying to go down swinging and go down with as gallant an effort as they can. And I applaud them for that, because you could just be in your own world of seething about how that race started, and yet these guys are pretty game. I give them a lot of credit.
Yeah, I agree with you. They've done a nice job, and it's.
We have a couple of kayakers now too, trying to get part of the race.
Oh well,
and it's like those guys that jumped out when Hank Aaron hit his 714th home run, right? The guys ran around the bases with him. They want to be part of the race here. And actually, they're crossing right in front of the Harvard shell, if you can watch that.
Yeah, you know, and we deal with kayakers a lot on the Charles River. They have remarkably little control of their boats, and they rarely look behind them.
Well, I don't think they're Harvard supporters. If they maybe collide with the Harvard shell, that'd be a first.
No course adjustments.
And the Harvard coxswain is steering a little bit to avoid this kayaker.
Working around it.
That was interesting. It reminds me of the the Oxford-Cambridge boat race when they had the protesters swim out in the middle of the course and cause I think it was the referee to stop the race. That didn't happen this time, and I don't think this kayaker's protesting anything as that person was.
And we have not, in the history of this race, had a referee stop and restart. That's a very difficult thing for the oarsmen to deal with. And Andy, you maybe have a view of the flag and get a watch on this.
The flag's not up yet, but we'll get the finish time when it does.
The Harvard crew now is approaching the finish line and rowing very long, very relaxed. Of course, it's easy to do that when you've got this kind of distance behind you. And it's and it
so
should
we
be
go 11:41 roughly for the finish for Harvard.
And I must say that, it's unfair to have this kind of race, but this has been a pretty good Harvard third varsity that just finished second at the IRAs to Princeton.
Well, Yale's rowing by the rock, and there's a Yale flag over the white H that's painted on the rock.
Looks like the Yale fans have taken over the rock.
They're out in force.
Despite its color.
And the final strokes here of the 3V race.
So here's Yale now finishing up the race and just about to go over. There's the flag.
We have a final time, unofficial of course, as 12:24.9. That's a gap of 43.5 seconds, roughly, as Harvard and Yale open the 151st regatta.
And you just heard the Harvard crew give a cheer to Yale.
Right.
Very sportsmanlike.
We've started the 151st regatta, Yale versus Harvard, as they compete here in the 3V for the New London Cup. And this year, Harvard takes it again, as they did in 2015. This time last year, they won by 4.4 seconds, and this year, 43.4 seconds. So a little different story with the conditions and the level of competitiveness here at the Thames River for the New London Cup. We are going to haul up stakes, as it were, and travel downstream for 3 miles and rejoin everyone at just before 3:30 p.m. when we'll race in the 2V race for the F. Valentine Chapel Trophy. And that'll be, again, just before 3:30. Rejoin us here on WNLC and on the Ivy League Digital Network. So for Greg Stone and myself, Andy Card, we're signing off until we see you again for the JV race.